First of all, thanks so much for inviting me here. I'm conscious that I think I'm the only person on the panel who's not a UK citizen or subject. And I use the second word because one of the things that strikes me walking into this magnificent venue is that as a non-British person, the first thing you see is a portrait of His Majesty King Charles III on the wall downstairs. And that hits you. It hits me at a gut level because it is an expression of identity. That portrait of the king tells me I'm in the United Kingdom. It tells me that there is a national identity here that identifies with him as father of the nation. And I make that point because I think sometimes these debates evolve beyond where they should be, which is, I think, at first principles. Because I think we first of all have to ask ourselves the question, what is a nation? There are three, arguably four if you include the Cornish on this island. There's the English, there's the Welsh, there's the Scottish. All three of them have a separate and distinct and unique and recognizable culture. People here recognize Welsh culture, they recognize Scottish culture, they recognize Englishness. And those cultures form. The nations exist. The reason the nations exist is because of a shared commonality and identity. If you take that away, we must ask ourselves the fundamental question, are they still nations? And that is why I think you get to the core of this debate, because identity is more than just who you feel you are in the context of this question. It fundamentally comes back to a much bigger question, which is loyalty. I love and respect this country. I love and respect the United Kingdom. I hope never to see conflict between my nation and the United Kingdom. But ultimately, identity is loyalty. And ultimately, identity is in the question of, were there ever to be conflict between this nation and my own across the Irish Sea? First of all, you guys would win. But secondly, unfortunately, much as I admire the king, I would be compelled not to stand on his side. Being British means that portrait that's where you stand. That is fundamentally where you stand. And the question we have to ask in the context of multiculturalism, is that true of many of the cultures in our society? And I don't ask that in an accusing way or to be provocative or to point the finger at anybody and call them disloyal, but I ask it as a question that we should be asking as Western nations, which is, do we any longer value the idea that the people who live amongst us must share not only our values, but a loyalty to our commonality as a group of people? Are we all in this together when the proverbial shit hits the proverbial wall? That's the fundamental question. And I think one of the problems with multiculturalism is that it tolerates an answer to that question that many of us don't agree with at a gut level. Norman Tebbit, this will be old ground to many of you here. Norman Tebbit articulated this in what he called the cricket test, where he said that if you are a third or fourth generation person from the Indian subcontinent living in Britain, and the test match team of India come to Old Trafford to play England in a test match, what side are you cheering for if you're a third or fourth generation migrant? And the answer is, if the answer to that question is you're cheering for India, then that is a problem. And I can say that as a representative of an Irish nation who have infested the world with our immigrants. But there's a difference between having an identity and having an attachment. So I always give the example of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish American football team, which some of you may or may not know, is the most twee, embarrassing, almost offensive characterization of Irishness you'll ever see. Their mascot is a literal leprechaun with his fists up. The supporters go and they wear green and they drink green Guinness and they behave like a couple from Missouri on St. Patrick's Day. And they're proud of that Irish identity, but I'm telling you now, it is a suit of clothes that they wear, a celebration of their heritage and where they came from. It is not their loyalty. There is nobody who supports the Notre Dame football team, who lives in the United States and is from South Bend, Indiana, who is opposed to the United States and would choose Ireland over it in the very unwise event of a military conflict between Ireland and the United States. Not only for reasons of loyalty, but also for reasons of self-preservation, one assumes. So I think it's very important to because I think this debate gets caught up often in the differing questions of multi-ethnic versus multicultural. There is nothing wrong with a multi-ethnic society. The United States is the greatest example of a relatively successful multi-ethnic society in history. Multicultural is different though, because culture ultimately in the context of national debates is a question about, it is that gut check question of, does that portrait on the wall represent me, or does my loyalty lie with somebody else overseas? And I think in a society where we are not very careful in terms of who we're admitting into our countries, that the answer to that question isn't, maybe not in the first generation, but certainly in the second, it's to the man on the wall. That's a problem. And I think that's a debate that we have to be confident enough to have more openly than we do, because it's not about race. It's about where your loyalties lie. And I think in this country, and I think I'm going to say it, although it will certainly offend people, I think in the context, for example, of the protests one sees on the streets of London each week about the events in the Middle East, I am not sure that there is a large section of society here that always identifies first and foremostly with the man on the wall downstairs. And I think that's a problem that this country, and indeed mine, and indeed France, and indeed many others, has yet to come to terms with. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John.